and talking about mapping, it's very good to have a map because especially if you do write a series, you want to go back and be able to have everything line up
Yeah.
because inevitably somebody's going to say, "Oh, well, in book 3, your character had green eyes, and in
Yeah.
book 7, they're hazel. Which is it?" There's always somebody who's going to pick that up. So it's attention to detail, and yeah, it's why I am big on outlining.
Welcome to Writers Uncorked, the podcast where we uncork the truth about the writer's life. We're your hosts, best-selling authors Jenna Lee and Michelle Scott, and we're here to bring you the no BS chats you've been craving.
Get ready to raise a glass to the real, unfiltered world of writers. This is Writers Uncorked.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Writers Uncorked. We are so excited to be back on the mic. It's been a little moment between us talking in terms of for the podcast. So we are excited to get back into it. And I know it's been summer holidays for you, Michelle, and winter vibes for me.
Yep.
Which is
Opposite
always
end of the world.
I know it's crazy when we talk about that of like, oh, you're in summer boiling, and then I'm like freezing here in winter. So it's crazy how we're on opposite sides of the world, but very cool that we get to connect in this way and talk about things that we are passionate about, which I absolutely love. And today we're going to be talking about plotting and our processes for plotting out books, for outlining. And I think it's just really great for us to both talk about, our differences in terms of how we plot out books. And I think as a bit of a caveat into it of like, everyone's different with how they plot, how they outline. And I think it's really working out what's best for you and taking, trying different things and then working it out as you, go on your writing journey and writing career. And things will change, no doubt, no doubt. Now, Michelle, how did you, when you first wrote your first book, what was your process then? And then how has it changed over the years?
I can't even remember my process then. It's like,
well, we go back.
dated myself quite a bit. I do know what is still the same is that I still use these legal pads. So I still do a lot of
I haven't seen those in years.
yeah. So actually going back, I did, now that I did plot out stories on my legal pads. And I'm trying to think really how, if I did full outlines, I'm pretty sure I did do extensive outlines even then with characters and so forth. And then, but the story that was the book that was first, gosh, I wrote Murder Uncorked, which was my first book that was published. But prior to that being published, I'd written several, like 6, 7, 8 thrillers already. So I used my legal pad. And back then too, I took a course called, it was through Writers Digest. I think I've talked about this before, which was a magazine. I don't know if they still have, I'm sure it's online now, Writers Digest. But this was pre-internet, so or early internet stages. And so it was a correspondence class. It came with a binder. It broke down characters. It broke down plot, structure, theme. And I just went through that and hand wrote out everything. So that was my process back then. It's still pretty similar, but now I use a computer and I do really extensive outlines. And so I always start with the what if, and like we talked a bit about that before. Pretty easy for me when I do a mystery or a thriller. It's, what if somebody was murdered? So then you take it from there and you start developing it. But I always develop plot through characters. The characters sort of dictate the plot for me. They tell me the story. When I do specific character interviews with each one. I ask specific questions of each one. And I do I do first person journals for those characters, which starts to dictate plot. Because, when you start out with a what if, you may know the beginning, obviously, and then for me, I always know the beginning and the ending before I really get going. But I obviously don't know the middle pieces. So the outline's a big deal.
So do
Uh,
you come up with like your idea for the story? Like, does that spark your interest first, or is it more character driven of like a character comes to your mind and then a story develops to that character?
characters.
Yeah, see,
Character.
I'm opposite in a way of like the actual story idea comes to me first, and then the characters do like step into the roles of that.
Yeah, I
It's just
guess it could
yeah.
go both ways on that because I do think of like, oh, wouldn't it be like cool to do a Western? Okay, well, like so then I'll get a theme. I'll think of it like a theme. Or wouldn't it be cool to do a family saga? Right. And
Mm.
then I start to ask myself, well, what would make up who would those characters be within that theme of a Western, right? So it versus a actual plot line per se, storyline per se, there I go with a theme and then I think of who would encompass that theme and then how do I unravel their story,
Mm.
right? Because for me as a reader, if I don't care about your characters, I do not finish your book. I am
Yeah.
not one of those. If I cannot connect with the character in the first, I might give 50 pages, but that's rare. If I can't connect with the character in the first even 20 pages, I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah. And I think that that's an important thing. Like you got to readers have got to emotionally connect to the character. And something that I always do is you've probably heard of this like GMCs. So basically it's goal, motivation, conflict. There's other ways that this plays out,
Yep.
but basically you write a little thing of like this is a story of character name who wants goal, like you put in the goal because motivation, but the conflict. And like that's their basically that's yeah their goals, their motivation, their conflicts, so that I always go back to that in the story. Like if I get like going down like I'm always going back to that of like, okay, well, what's their actual purpose? Like I'm not just gonna write a story about a character that doesn't have any flaws, it doesn't have any goals, it has no motivation, like, and then there's no conflict because it's like that's boring as shit. Like there's
Well,
nothing.
it's also not real life, right? And I think
Yes.
books, whether they're deep and literary or they're romance or they're sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, it doesn't matter what the genre is, you want to be able to relate. And you
Yeah.
can't relate because none of us are perfect and none of us have perfect lives. And if we can't relate, then, unless it's just so outside of the box from the norm for us, like if you're writing aliens or something, but you're still writing a character, you're going to want to write, I think a character that somebody relates to. That's,
Yeah, like they've got emotions, they've got things that we can connect to no matter what we've gone through in our life. There is going to be something that's like, oh, me too, or like they're going through something that I maybe not personally, but you've experienced through something else, or just making them actually realistic. And then from that, like I always put like a solution, like what actually like from the goal, motivation, and conflict, what's the solution here? Like what are they aiming toward? Like what's the result in this, so that I can go back to that. And I'll do that for main characters. And I write a lot of reverse harem romance, which is basically, for those that don't know, it's like you have basically it's reverse harem. So a harem is normally, I think it's in, I don't want to actually be wrong about this from like the history books, no one come at me, but basically a harem's like normally a guy has like 3 or 4 wives and he's allowed to marry each of them and take what he wants from each of those. I think it's in Islamic culture or something like that, but basically this is reverse. So it's normally a female character and she'll have 3 to 4 boyfriends and takes, has relationships with them. So basically for me, it's a lot of characters to develop because you have your main character and then you have your 3 to 4 main male characters that do play a really big part in like the romance and the actual storyline, and then what their relationship is with her, and then what they've got different goals, they've got different motivations, and it all like it's a lot. If you think of like normally you have two, like if you're writing a romance, you've got male, female, and you're writing both of them if you're doing dual point of view. And then this, you add in a lot more characters. And then depending on the type of story, you'll have your villains, you'll have, all these other characters, best friends, and all that. So it does get a little complicated. So you've got to you got to have these set out for each character to know where they fit in the story, and making sure that they do build a really good connection to the readers as well, and that it all makes sense together. It's a lot.
Well, I would imagine there's a lot of subplotting that goes
Yeah.
into all of that as well.
Yeah.
And you also, I would think when you're plotting, you're thinking about your particular readership, because that's not going to fit for a lot of readers, right? Just like cozy mystery isn't going to fit for a lot of readers. So I'm always thinking about when I'm doing the actual plotting piece, outside of developing good characters, I'm thinking about the expectations the reader wants to show up in the plot, which even though is, I guess, like a prescription, right? It's like we know there's going to be red herrings, or we know, like within what you write, that she's going to have 3 to 4 relationships or whatever these pieces are. It's also, so you want to give the readers within the plot what they want, but you want to try to do it. The difference is you're doing it in your way. You're telling the story your way, and that's what makes it unique, I guess. So
Yeah, and there's always a lot of different, making sure that all the guys are different in different ways, and why she develops relationship with each of them, and how like there is a lot of conflict around depending on how they build their relationship. Like they might be best friends, and it's or how do we all share the same person, or how does this dynamic work? And there's a lot
I
of
gotta ask, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I gotta ask, so do all the guys, are they aware? And I just want, like, I could only handle one. I don't
yeah.
know how anybody could handle that many.
Yeah, and
I'm
that
the
excuse me, that's a fantasy of it, in terms of like why it's so like the readership for reverse harem has grown. Like since I first published, my very first series was reverse harem, and it's hard to step away from it now because I have built a really loyal readership, and there is so many readers that do like this. And I think because it's the ultimate fantasy, it's never going to happen in real life. Very
is it?
rarely.
Sorry.
Very rarely that people are going to actually, do this. There is rare cases that I have seen posted where she does, which good on you. Like that's the ultimate fantasy of like getting, what you get from each person, of like normally with the characters, like you'll have different personalities, and together you create that unit where you work. Like sometimes they only want one like they can't have a relationship with multiple people, and they choose to just have a relationship with her to keep them as best friends, or whatever it might be. And in other cases it's like they don't even know each other, and then there's conflict of like how they actually share one person and how it works. So yeah, it's a whole ball game. You're probably just like, oh my god, what is this?
Like I
But
said,
yeah, I think
once enough.
the popularity of it is because it is the ultimate fantasy of not, it's not going to happen in real life in that sense. So yeah, for me, like it is making sure that everyone has a part and a role to play, and they're not just added in there for the sake of adding a person in. Like that they've all got to have their GMCs, and it's got to be, for me, I really do love the enemies to lovers trope, in a sense that they do have each of their goal, motivation, conflict is opposite to the other one, so they're fighting against each other in a way of like what they actually want, and the conflict and what builds up that, like, oh, we can't be together but we really like each other, but we, there's all these things standing in the way, and it creates all this conflict, and it creates that, oh, when are they gonna kiss, like, especially in a moment, when are they gonna kiss, or when are they, like, there's so much tension there. And you see this from, I don't know if you've read the popular fantasy series like Fourth Wing, and that whole
Have it,
series.
but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
she plays really big on that enemies to lovers, and it's such a popular trope of, yeah, building that, the tension in it, especially in a romance where it's like forbiddenness of like, we can't be together and we don't like each other, but there's this, oh, that we really like each other and want each other, but we can't. So it creates that. And I think that emotional connection, like the readers, like rooting for them to be to get, like, they're like, just kiss, like, just do this already, but it's like they can't, or there's all these, always something standing, like an obstacle in their way. And I think that keeps that, especially in a romance, like that keeps the romance arc going, because I do believe, like, in terms of plotting, like, you have your story idea and you've got to have your certain parts to a story, like, your overall, you've got your act 1, act 2, act 3, and then we break it down even further. Well, I do, everyone's different in this, but then you break it even further into, different elements that build that out. And you've also got your romance arc element if you're writing a romance that weaves through it. And for you, like, the crime, the murder, like, that's an arc that weaves through that overall story as well. And how your characters play into it, it's a mind map, it's a mind.
It is a mind map, and talking about mapping, it's very good to have a map, because especially if you do write a series, you want to go back and be able to have everything line up,
Yeah.
because inevitably somebody's going to say, oh, well, in book 3, your character had, um, green eyes, and in
Yeah.
book 7, they're hazel. Which is it? There's always somebody who's going to pick that up. So it's attention to detail. And yeah, it's why I am big on outlining. And I still just do, we talked about this before we got on. I still just do my own process. There's so many really cool programs out there, and I buy them and I think, oh, I'm going to learn this program, and like, it'll help me plot, or it'll help me think of some, new ideas or whatnot, new characters. But I always go back to my process. Like,
Yeah.
I could spend tons of time just learning, which I love to do, but that's also procrastinating, which writers are really good at.
Yeah. And a lot of the time like, I think once you get in a story idea, like, I don't know about you, but like, I'm itching to just write. Like, I'm just like, oh, I'm done with this whole plotting outline. So I'll have like the overall, I'll know what's happening from basically like start, middle, finish, and then I'll even have bits in within those 3 acts of like what's got to happen, and then what, the main bits, and then the goal, motivation, conflict, I'll break those down so I can connect to the readers a bit, connect to the characters a lot more to develop that. And then I'll also, even before I do the acts, it's like, I always ask a question, like a story breakdown of like 5 things that will happen in this book, like that have to happen in the book. So yeah, I'll write down just 5 main things, and then I'll build that into the actual plot and the acts.
Like what?
So basically, yeah, 5 things that will need to happen in this book. It's like, well, for me, the book that I've just finished writing, it's like Alec goes missing, which is her brother. Then she goes looking for Alec, and which leads her over the other side of town, which she's not allowed to go on because of the gangs and like the brotherhood rules that you're not allowed to go over there. So she goes over there. Then she runs into them, and something happens. And then it's like, then she gets a message from blah blah blah. So they're basically just like from my head, like I've like 5 things that will happen in the book, and even extend that. I can extend that to 10 things. It's just basically the bits that need to happen in the book. And then
Uh-huh.
I'll take that and put it into the 3 acts, and then I'll break it down into we've talked about this before, of like Save the Cat writes a novel, the structure of that, which basically goes, I've got the book here so that I don't muck it up. But basically, it's like Act One, you got your opening image, then you got your theme starter, you got your setup, your catalyst, debate, and then you roll into Act Two, which is break into two. So yeah, they decide, if they accept the call to leave their comfort zone, or some type of thing will happen. Yeah, and then B story, new character comes in, whatever, fun and games, which is a big chunk of like, they're in their new world, they're either loving it or hating it, whatever it might be. Then you got your midpoint, then there's like bad guys close in, like there's a whole structure, literally breaking it all down in that, which I find really helps to hit those points to make sure the story does that it does have bones in it, that it is going to be engaging, and that there is stuff like it fits into the system. But yeah, for me, I like to have that as a guide.
You're making sure that every chapter has tension in it
Yeah,
in some way, which is really it needs to, because otherwise, and I'm not talking, I mean, when you're talking tension, it could be very passive tension from characters or even environment, or
yeah,
it could be, or it can be really overt tension. So, but it's got to be something that keeps people turning the page, and
yeah,
so that it's, boring or drug out. Because
yeah.
sometimes in writing, oops, sorry, that's one of my dogs.
No, I didn't even hear it.
I have a UPS delivery, sorry. Good. Um, but it's the tension is what's important, because otherwise you don't want to continue reading it. You don't,
Yeah, you
because
got to keep the stat. Yeah, and I think for me, what I've learned over the years of like in each at the end of each chapter, like keeping ending it on a hook where it's like the tension's really high, like something happens, and it doesn't even have to be made, like it doesn't have to be a major thing, but like either like she's in this situation and something happens, and you're like, oh, I need the answer, and it hooks them, and then it's like into the next chapter of what might happen, that keeps them going. And I think for me, when I first wrote my very first book, I didn't even plot or outline it at all. I was just like, I know what's going to happen. Like I know the start, middle, and end, and like I know the journey of it, and I know what's got to happen. And I just wrote, like I didn't even know. I was just like, oh, let's just try. Like let's just whatever. But then, like, to develop over the years and learn all these different, how to structure a book and how to outline, and like all these bits and pieces that I've learned, I've taken and then molded it into my own system and process and what works for me. And, it's good learning all different new techniques and then molding it into what works for you and your brain and how you're wired, and because we're all different in that way.
the only thing that I think that's changed for me, my process is still the same in so many ways, but now I just take it onto the computer screen.
Yeah,
Um, but like I said, still going back and using notepads actually helps me think, because writing old school way is just, I don't know, it just helps me get some juices going. I use it a little bit differently now, not so much maybe an idea, probably do that on the computer, but I do use it to, as I'm reading through pages, I will go through and write out questions versus write instead of on the notes. I may do both sometimes. I may utilize the computers and just put my notes in there, but I always put the notes on the yellow notepad so
yeah,
that when I go back through the third and fourth drafts, I can start, if I've answered the questions that I've written, I can cross them off, so that, because I try to be very good in a mystery of summing of completing everything except maybe certain pieces of subplots if I'm doing a series that I know is that they'll continue. However, I try to close it up enough that if somebody doesn't want to continue the series, you hope that they do, but you know that they feel satisfied. That's a balancing act of satisfying the reader that's read book 3, but not books 1 and 2. Maybe they won't pick up books 4 and 5, but maybe they picked up book 3, read it, and they will pick up all the other books. So you have to, even within a series, be able to make it stand alone in a lot of ways. It's
Yeah.
better if you can already know the characters, but you do want to, it's a fine line I have found, and this is a little bit of a sidetrack from the plotting, but it's still plotting. It's a fine line to give a reader who has read, say, book 1 and 2. Let's say they have picked book 3 up and they didn't even know there were 2 other books. There's a fine line of giving them just enough information dump without upsetting the readers who've read book 1 and 2 and are like, yeah, I know, right? Right. So, but book 3 then feels satisfied, but then there's a realization where, oh, I'm thinking maybe there's more than this is maybe there's more than just this book in the series. Usually they know it, but not always.
See, I'm not opposite. I always leave if I'm writing a series. I'm that asshole that will leave it on a cliffhanger and be like, "Ah, you need to read the next book."
I've done that. And you know why I don't do that anymore? Because I wrote a book where I left a huge cliffhanger. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever written. I loved the book. I wrote it in 2013 or 14. And my dad had just passed away, and I had to step away from writing for a long period of time for a variety of reasons. And so readers were left hanging, and I've never gone back and so there were readers who were really upset with me. But, you know, obviously they don't know, you never know what's going on in somebody's personal life. And so, but I'm very conscientious of that now. That
Yeah, I think you're probably burned of like, oh, I don't want that to ever happen again. Or you'll finish the series and write literally all of it so that you know that when you release that first one, that the others are coming. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I've always liked the cliffhanger, and I always like to keep my readers hanging on the edge of like, oh no,
Well,
like,
I
yeah,
love a good cliffhanger. Yeah, I mean, you do. I find that doing that in the chapters, it's really valuable, right?
yeah.
That's what people
Like
reading.
so for this one that I've just finished, right? Like the overall plot gets answered, but then the way it ends, it's like, oh well, now I don't want to give it away or anything, but like now there's a whole new, like, we need answers to what's just happened, because it rolls into the next plot line of like, oh shit, I got the answer of like who ended up killing her brother, but now something else happened, and I need like, and that trails it into that next book to find out what happens there. So
Whatever.
basically, yeah, you get like you I wrap it up in a bow of like, you get your answer of like what, who murdered, like you get the answer to it, but yeah,
The
it
main
just,
answer, but there's enough of a string of something of a subplot. Yeah, no, I get
yeah,
it. But one thing I would add to that for the writers themselves, this isn't for the readers. The writer has to love those characters to be willing to continue.
yeah,
And your reader may love your characters more than you. So
yeah,
you have to be prepared for that and be like, okay, I'm going to write another book for the readers, right? And
yeah,
that's a quandary I get into. It's like I get another idea and I'm like, oh, like squirrel, right? I'm going to go write this instead. Yet there's an expectation over here. Well, wait a minute, you didn't finish. I need to know what happened here, right? And so
yeah,
you focus, at least I'm one of those writers that has a very hard time staying focused because I have a gazillion ideas and I want to write them all. And I know that I can't. So I'm really having to be very disciplined, which it used to be easier. For some reason, it's getting harder as I get older, but I used to be far more disciplined in doing that. Also because I was under like contracts from a major publisher. That's probably why, to be honest, now that I think about it, it's like, oh yeah, I'm under contract and I get paid when I turn that book in. So that's what, now writing as an indie, it's a whole different ball game because you do have the freedom to like be a squirrel a bit if you
Yeah.
want to, because, you know, but if you build up a readership, then it takes away that independence too. So you have to be willing to like, okay, I love these characters and I can see myself writing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books and
And
on.
if there is a plot that can take you that long too, of like keeping the same characters, because if you don't have an idea, or like you're gonna lose interest if there's not something and a story idea there to
I
keep
don't know
it.
that I could do it in, I don't think I personally as a writer could not do it in the romance genre. That's just not my forte or my
Yeah.
strength. I can include romance and mystery. Now, I could probably do that I could probably do family sagas and do
Yeah.
lots of drama within them. And because I feel like in a family saga, you can incorporate murder, romance, right? I think you could do continuation and decades of different characters coming in and so forth and so on
Yeah.
behind the theme though. I would, for myself, I would have to look at that. What kind of family is this? Am I doing a Yellowstone family? Am I doing a cartel family? So there's lots of stories there. The mysteries make it easy to make a series out of because the expectation is whether you're watching it as a weekly show or binge watching something or you're a reader of them, you automatically know, okay, well, there's going to be a dead body in this book and it's going to get that piece is going to get solved. You know
Yeah.
that, and that's the expectation. The storyline that the what I think are the threads that hold those stories together in series are the subplots with themselves. We
Mm.
want to know, the reader wants to know what happens to the characters that we care about. Did they wind up with so and so, or did they find their long lost, child that they gave up for adoption, or did they cure the disease they had? Those are the things that we care about because we already know our main character, our protagonist in a murder mystery is going to solve the murder or the
Yeah.
mystery,
Yeah.
right? So, but yeah, I don't know how I don't know. I guess in series romance, and you'd be the one to answer this. If I was to do a series romance and plot out a series romance, I think what I would have to do is do it again. I am going to go back to theme, is do it under a theme, and they would be different characters each time. So,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
like I
side character, like, and that's, yeah, that's a huge thing of like side characters. And in this series that I've just created, like the world, originally it was going to be a 3-book series. I'm like, okay, I'm doing a 3-book series. As I was writing the first book, I'm like, oh, I think it's just going to be 1 book. And then as I got to the end, the characters are like, we're not done. Like, we're just getting to that, the romance arc, like, they're just getting to that. They haven't said, like, I love you yet, but they're built, like, there is more, like, they're building a lot of emotion and connection to it, and they're not finished. Like, their stories just, it wasn't finished. And in my head, I'm like, okay, I've got to continue this into the next book. But what I need to actually work out, okay, because this has a murder mystery element, she's solved the mystery of like who murdered her brother. He went missing, then he ended up dead. Who murdered, like, that gets answered, but the romance element to it, it breaks it. The person that she has, they have admitted feelings for, that gets broken at the end of like the 3rd act from what she does, not giving too much away. So then that brings it into the next book in terms of the romance. It's like we have this really great connection. We're building this relationship, and then something dramatic happens that cuts the cord. And now coming into the second book, the main part, especially for the first act and halfway through the second, it's like rebuilding that can it be fixed? Can we get past what she did to build that? And that whole thing. And then there's there's an overarching plot line, a new one that does connect, but it's more going to be revolving around the side characters that then they come into it the next book, like the third book, where it's, you can read the first two, but it's the side characters, and you can read it standalone in that way.
Yeah, the characters they will dictate.
So it's interconnected world. Like it's the same world, side characters, and they all are like best friends, or they know each other, and it's like it's all in the same world, which is big on going back to having Bibles and having set things of like who these characters are, who the side characters are, what did we describe them as, and editors can help with this too. I know my editors put together like a Bible and booklet, and they put down all the details that they take when they do edit, which is super helpful. Like if you can get your editor to do that. I've got my own Bible, but it always helps having theirs of like what they picked up as well, to have that as a guide. And I think that's, especially if you're writing a world where there's a lot of books in it, even though it's different characters, the world's got to be the same. The people have got to be the same. The way you describe the supermarket or the street, it's got to be the same. Otherwise people will pick up on it.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
So
Bible
is a thing to have, and they're good to have.
Yeah, exactly. We've got to go back to, because we forget. We're writing and we're just like, I don't know, blue eyes, brown, like I can't even, when you're in that zone and you're in that writing sprint, you forget those little details. And that's why it's important. We're going to do another episode on it, of like revising. And when you go into that revision, having your Bible there is going to be a lifesaver of like making sure that you did get all those details the same, or their nickname, or like whatever somebody calls it, like all those things. When we go into revision, that's where it really stands out as well, to make sure it does.
Well, what makes it easy too now for me, so, back in the day when I would create binders of notepad stuff and plotting, and I would do visuals of characters and cut out pictures of magazines. And then it progressed to, I would go and find Google Images and print those out. And now I utilize AI to give me a character description, and I'll, create that character utilizing AI, and then plug that photo into my outline, right? So it's right there. So I know what they look like, and I can tweak that too. AI can tweak those looks, that right? Or you can get it close enough where you're like,
and even Pinterest, like I always Pinterest look, like I'll create boards for the world, different scenes that I come up with, how people look. Like I'll always do a Pinterest board and just get a bit of a visual vision, and I always have that up, when I am writing, if I need it, or when I'm doing revisions. That visual element definitely helps.
The visual element helps a lot for me.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I hope everyone's found this episode useful when it comes to outlining. We will be doing an episode where we're going to actually do a workshop on the Save the Cat Writes a Novel, like the outline, to show you all the different bits and what they actually mean, how it works, and that type of thing. And we're also doing an episode on books that we love and recommend for writers, which I think every writer has like a bookshelf full of books on how to write, how to outline, how to, character arcs, how to build certain things, like world build, whatever it might be. So we're going to share our favorite books, and so that you can have a look at them and see what might be useful and to add to your bookshelf as well. So we're excited about that.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, we will see you in the next episode.